One of the things that comes up a lot when you're giving a talk is that someone will usually have the question, will the slides be made available? So I want to answer that question for you now. They're already available. There's the link. If you're having any trouble reading any of them because you're sitting in the back or you're getting older like I am and you can't see as well, then download the slides. You'll have them in front of you, and then it won't matter whether you can see them on the screen. So that's one note. The other note is I would normally invite you to come to the KMWorld bookstore and buy the book so that I could sign it for you, but I see the KM bookstore is no longer set up over here. So you're welcome to order the book via Amazon, and then if you want, I'd be glad to send you a signature through the mail. So we'll talk about a number of things today, including sort of the basics of how do you promote a knowledge management program. Really, it's about selling the program inside of your organization, and we'll talk about the basics, who you're going to sell to, what is it that you need to use to promote your program, where and when and how do you sell. So that'll be a big part of what we talk about. And then there's some themes that those of you who attended my workshop, some of the stuff that I talked about there you'll find familiar, one of which is the idea of articulating your visions. We'll talk about that, the importance of a vision, and defining use cases for your users, talking about telling stories, and then we'll talk about the spin selling methodology and how you can use that to sell KM. Talk about making the business case, selling the benefits, getting support from your senior leadership, how to motivate participation, which is always a big one, leading by example. And we'll finish up with a topic that I usually have in most of my talks, which is pointing out things to avoid. And in many cases, those might be controversial points, but I always like to spice it up with that to end with. So that's what we'll talk about today. So let's start by talking about, to whom do you sell knowledge management? So you might think that the topic of gaining buy-in was mostly about getting senior leadership buy-in, and that's certainly real important. But as you can see from this slide, there are many other organizations and groups that you actually have to also get buy-in from. So let's start with senior leaders. Those are the people that will probably fund your effort, sponsor it, get it off the ground, enable you to even get started. So certainly we'll talk about what you have to do with senior leaders. But then beyond that, if you think about it, even a senior leader, if they endorse a knowledge management effort and kick it off and fund it, their first-line managers become really important, because even if the senior leader says we ought to do this, it's really always the first-line manager that you really have to get the attention of, because if they don't, in fact, follow through on that, it can just be something that gets talked about and otherwise ignored. So getting the first-line managers is just as important as getting top management support. The individuals in the organization, those are the people that you're actually wanting to do the activities of knowledge management. How do you reach them? Even if their managers are telling them to do something or giving them goals, doesn't mean that they will do it. So what can you do to get their participation? People who are respected in the organization that may not have a formal leadership title, but are thought leaders, people that are looked up to. Having them play a role in your program is often real important. Champions are those people who believe in knowledge management, are fellow true believers, and if you can find who those are, they may not have any formal role in knowledge management, they may not work in any organization that has any real affiliation with it, but if you can find them and enlist them in your cause, they can be really helpful. And then there's the people that you can directly manage that do knowledge management as their job. In smaller organizations, that might just be you. You may be the only one. In larger organizations, there may be hundreds of people, and then there's all the continuum in between. So what do you want those people to do? They have obviously an important role in selling KM. There's external parties that play a key role. You have your clients, the people that you're selling things to, and you might not think of them always in the context of knowledge management because you think of it more as an internal function. But yesterday, Jean-Claude was mentioning the importance of the client to Microsoft in terms of what does the client want, and they start with that, and that's a really good place to start. Why are we doing knowledge management? It's not just for the sake of doing it. It's not just for our employees. It's really for the benefit to the customers that we sell to. Our partners, those that go to market with us and help us succeed, there's a role for them to play in helping support it. And the vendors, those that supply us with products and services, in many cases with tools that we use as part of knowledge management. And then there's all the supporting functions. There's probably other ones that I haven't listed here, but if you go through them, certainly we all have something to do with information technology. We probably have sort of a love-hate relationship with IT. We may be a part of IT and may not wish to be a part of IT, but nonetheless, Generally, there's going to be some technology involved in what we do. I always counsel not to lead with technology, but at some point you're going to get there. And it's better to have IT aligned with you and be one of your partners than it is to be a group that you're fighting with. So what can you do with IT to support your efforts in a way that not only gives you the technology that you want to use, but also that they help lead the way by showing by example how that can be put to use. Human resources is similar. You want, in most of these functions, there's multiple modes that you want to interact with them. There's things they have to deliver to you that you use for your program. There's things that they can stop you from doing or deny you, that can be a roadblock that you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then there's things that they actually can supply to you that are going to be supportive and helpful to your program. So in the case of HR, if you're trying to do things with motivation, HR can be an important partner in implementing programs to motivate employees, but they could also prevent you from doing it. In the early days of my career with digital, I always had this idea of having a rewards and recognition program that was like a frequent flyer program. And for years, it was HR that was always in the way because they would say, we can't have that kind of a recognition program. And it was until years later when I was with HP that we finally were able to do it. But HR then became an important ally in being able to administer it. Professional development, in many cases, knowledge management gets aligned with organizational development and learning and development, and they can certainly play a role in helping to train, but also in better integrating knowledge management with learning. And then similar for all the other functions you see listed here. So you may find that one of these functions is where you report into, or it may be an organization that you need support from. And each one of these can both be an ally or they can be someone that blocks your way. So let's look at some of the ones at the bottom, like legal, information security, and risk management. I've run into situations with all three of those types of functions where they want to sort of deny what you want to do. An example would be, we're going to block all access to all external social media. Has anyone ever run into that kind of a problem? Okay. That doesn't really help you when you're trying to share knowledge, but it's a real problem. So you can either try to enlist them so they understand what you're doing and get them to endorse what you're doing, or they can serve as a blockade. And so there's probably a role in each one of these functions to not only get their support, to not be a roadblock, but also to help set the example for others. So we want to start by defining knowledge management in terms that make sense to your organization. Don't get bogged down with, what is the meaning of knowledge management in an abstract sense. There's plenty of writing about that. I've written about that, but you don't need to adopt that. You really want to think about it in terms of what does it mean to you. And so in many cases, there's lots that's been out there. There's lots of examples that you can follow. There's lots of material that's been written down, but that should be a source of inspiration to you, but not necessarily something that you slavishly follow. If knowledge management means something very specific in your case, then develop that and then talk about it in terms that make sense to your organization, and don't worry about what the standard definitions may be. Similarly with the objectives for your program. You want to know what's important to your organization, not what someone else thinks is important. And this is where you can get into trouble if you take all of your cues from things like maturity models. If you think that you've got to be at level 3 or level 4 maturity, and that means you have to have these 5 pieces of functionality, that may not be the case in your company. And so you have to start by asking the question, what really are the top 3 business objectives of our company that KM can support? And you do that in a variety of ways. But one way is asking people, what are the kinds of problems that you typically face? What are the opportunities that we're not currently addressing that if we could only do, it would make your life so much easier? And after surveying and talking and observing, you eventually figure out these are the things that matter to us. And that's where you drive your program. And they may not include any of the things that a maturity model says you need to do, which is fine. But you've got to figure out what's important to your company. And then if you're selling KM in the organization and it's aligned with the things that matter, then you should have a better go of it than if you're trying to sell something that comes from an external input. The next one I'll spend some time on later, talking more about vision and give you an example of vision. But I really believe this is really important. You've got to understand in your mind, what does this look like when it's working? And that's really something you should have, not something you have to memorize. It should be something that just flows out of you because you're so passionate about it. And if you can't answer that, if someone said, well, what's this KM stuff about? If you don't launch immediately into a spontaneous, impassioned, brief diatribe about it, then you should go back and say, why am I doing this? What are we up to? But most people that know me know that if you were to ask me, what's this knowledge management about, I would quickly go into something where I started to talk about my vision for how, if we had communities that worked a certain way, this is how it would work. And you should have something equivalent. It may not be at all the same, which is fine. But what is it for your company? What's the vision that you have? And if someone said, if we could only do this, what would that look like? You should be able to answer that and have that at the tip of your tongue. Strategy is an interesting one because we all talk about strategy and we hear that bandied about, but many times I've run into the situation where people think a strategy is really a set of things they'd like to see. So they say our strategy for knowledge management is that all information is delivered seamlessly to people immediately. That's not a strategy. That could be a very worthwhile goal, but a strategy is how do you actually do that? So the vision is sort of like, here's how things ought to work. The strategy is here's the practical steps in order to get there, and that's how you have to think about it. And you need to have a strategy that takes your vision and has a way of implementing it. You may not be able to implement it quickly. It may take you years to implement it. You may do it in stages, but you need to have a strategy that's a concrete set of actions. And goals are the things that you're going to give to your employees that you're going to talk about over and over again. It should be something that everybody is aware of, and they should be able to say, yes, I know what these goals are. And the goals ought to tie directly to the objectives. So if you've identified 3 objectives for your organization, the goals ought to match those. And when you talk about knowledge management, those things keep coming up over and over again. So you don't have to refer to it. You don't have to go back and think about it. It's something that's top of mind. Benefits are what you're going to use the program to accomplish. There are lots of benefits, and I'll show you some examples, the ones that I've defined, but once again, they're going to be ones that are meaningful to you. So one way is to take from my list of 15 benefits and pick some and say, these are the ones that mean a lot to us. I talked to one person yesterday who said they had chosen one of the 15 benefits that was really going to resonate in their company, and that's great. And if you can use one of them, by all means, anything that I show you today, absolutely take it, reuse it, steal it. You don't have to attribute it, just take advantage of it. But you're also going to modify it, right? You're not going to use everything as is. So it's a starting point, it's a point of suggestion, but you're going to tailor it to meet your company's needs. And then use cases. This is one where you often get tripped up in platitudes. So how many of you have ever heard someone give out some general statement like, we want everyone to share their knowledge? All right. We want everyone to collaborate with everybody else. All right. So these kind of things sound sort of good, but in reality they sort of break down because they don't get very specific. And no one's going to get inspired by that. If you say, I want everyone here to connect to their peers and share their knowledge, or some other version of that, it quickly doesn't get you anywhere because it's not specific. So the use cases need to be, what are the specific tasks and activities that you want people to do as part of your program, and they should be meaningful in your organization's context, and the people should, when they respond to that, should say, yeah, that makes sense, that would benefit me, I want to do that. So you can't give them a use case that they would shrug off and say, I would never need that. You need use cases where they go, that's right, that's what I would want to do, and so tell me more, how can I do that better? You have to promote knowledge management continuously. It's not just when you're starting. That's obviously an important time. But you have to do it in these other phases. So it's under consideration. You have to do a lot of selling just to get it off the ground. You have to persuade people that it's needed. You'll have to persuade people to invest in it. You'll have to get different groups that I showed on the first slide to spend some of their time, energy, and resource on it. And if they agree and say, let's go forward, then you may enter a planning phase where there's more selling to go on, which is how are you going to do the specific things the program needs to accomplish? Who are you going to get engaged to do that? And then when you launch, you may think, okay, once we're launched, we don't need to sell anymore, but that's not true. You have to keep selling pretty much forever. And when you're ramping up and when you're in an ongoing state, and even if you're an ongoing state, and even if you're a great knowledge management program and you become a great example and you're giving talks here at KMWorld about it and you're getting accolades and you're receiving the KM Reality Award, and you think, we don't have to sell anymore, we've got it made. You don't have it made because knowledge management, unlike finance or HR, is not assumed that it will always be there. It's not a given, and every major program that's had success is always at risk of not existing the next day. Has anyone here ever been in a program that was doing well and then you found out that it had been eliminated? I have. And so it doesn't make any sense, and I've heard the stories from a lot of you here this week about great programs that had done wonderful things and they were so proud of them, and then one day they had a merger or some kind of downturn in the economy, and the next day knowledge management was no more. And what happens is later on, that same company will realize, oh, I guess we do need that. And they'll have to start over again. And by then, they may have forgotten completely that they were once a leading example of it. And they'll say, we're starting up knowledge management. So it's a little bit like they've lost track of the fact that they were once good at it. But that's why you have to keep selling. And even after it's been eliminated, and to bring it back, you have to keep selling. So this just never ends, and it's different in different phases, and there's different requirements. But keep in mind that whatever we're talking about today, you not only do it at the beginning, you continue to do it. And there are a lot of ways to sell it. You can do it in person, where you sit down with people and you talk about the vision that you have and the use cases. You can do it online with promotions that include websites and intranet pages. And if you have an enterprise social network like Yammer or Jive, where you continue to interact with people, there's a lot of advantages to doing that, because not only do you use it as a communication channel, but you use it as an example of how you want people to actually collaborate. So if the knowledge management program, by the way, is not setting the example for what they want people to do, and I've been in situations where that's true, that's unfortunate, because you'd certainly like to have the KM team say, this is how to do it, follow our example, not say something like, well, you all ought to be sharing, but we don't, right? So you don't want that to happen. But so an online presence is certainly a good way to do that. You can use email through occasional messages and newsletters and have leadership communications, meetings where you get to present, or you have it on the agenda of recurring meetings, gatherings, if there's recognition events where knowledge management can be addressed. There's training, and a good opportunity that I've always liked to take advantage of is at new hire orientation. And what's a better time to get somebody on board with knowledge management than when they've just been hired? So if you can get a regular block on new hire orientation where you show up or one of your team shows up and gives a brief introduction to people, that's a great time to get them before they get into the flow of work, or before they get reached by other people who are jaded and tell them not to waste their time doing this, or it's impossible, or whatever. So get them when they're fresh and ready, and then they can help be evangelists for you as they get started. And you can certainly have plenty of knowledge management specific classes, although it's better if your knowledge management environment is easier to use, so you don't have to have too much training on it. And then there's ongoing webinars and training and meetings and tutorials that you can provide. So there's all these methods where you sell your program, but you've got to get your messages down first and get those working well, and then you can use these channels and vehicles to communicate them. So why do you need to sell knowledge management? Why shouldn't it just be assumed that knowledge management is a good thing and it should just be there? Well, no, it's generally not. So we've all probably been through this. Those of you who have been in the field for a while know this from your own experience. Those of you who are new are finding this out now. But you have to do it in order to get initially just the agreement to have the program at all. So you may be the one who has the vision, or that you're inspired to do this. You've got to go and convince other people that you should be allowed to proceed. So in my case, when I got started the first time, I had probably been doing knowledge management for many years, but we didn't call it that. The field didn't really yet have that name recognition. So we just called it something else. I had various euphemistic titles like resource manager, information manager. It was always done in addition to some other task. So I had my job, which was managing a team of consultants or something equivalent, and then on the side, I was also the resource manager or whatever. We had a lot of different euphemisms for it, but at the core, it was to try to provide information and resources to people to help them do their jobs better. So finally, it's when the field started being branded as knowledge management. In my case, it was in 1996. The head of our professional services business at Digital came to me and said, all right, let's go take a look at this knowledge management. You seem to be the guy sort of doing stuff like this. Let's go. And we went and visited Ernst & Young, who was already doing it at the time, and they were sort of a leading example. And they showed us what they were up to, and he turned to me and he said, okay, I want you to do this for us at Digital. So I actually had a pretty good start. Somebody that wanted to do it, I didn't have to persuade him to do it, and he told me to do it, so this could be my job. I didn't have to do whatever my other job was. But that was just a start. Now I had to go out and actually find other people, and I wasn't giving any great support for that. So the selling sort of began at that point. I had to then do a number of things that we'll talk through about lining up consultant support, getting resources assigned from different teams, and I had to keep doing that for quite some time before we ever got to the point where we felt like, okay, we're really going now. So it's a long, sort of slow, and sometimes painful process. But at least at the start, I got that much. If you're trying to start from scratch and you haven't even been asked to, then you're going to have even more work to do of persuading somebody that you should be allowed to do it. So the funding, you need a budget to fund something. One of the basic rules that I always say is that you want at least one person doing knowledge management full time. If you're trying to do it with less than that, it's pretty hard. So if you're the knowledge manager for your company, but you're also something else, and some of you I know are in that case, you should at some point try to get it to the state where there's 1.0 person assigned to it. Now that may not be all you need. You may need more, but if you have less than that, it's difficult because you're always going to get pulled in other directions. And resources, right? So I mentioned that when I started out, I had to go off and it was kind of like recruiting the dirty dozen. You're going to find somebody who likes knowledge management, but it's not officially their job, so you secretly get them to spend some time and energy, and who else do you know? And then the word spreads, and eventually you get this band of enthusiasts together, and you get it off the ground. But then when you go to the other businesses and you say, well, you assign somebody to work in knowledge management, many times they'll reluctantly give you someone or someone in name only, and so you start this struggle of getting the resources to actually be interested in knowledge management, to have time and energy to devote to it. To spread the word, you have to be involved in leading by example and recruiting people to join and participate in the program. So that sort of never ends. And you should never look at it as just the people that you directly supervise or that you directly fund. That may be a few people, but if you can get lots more people who are enthusiasts, then that really helps your cause. And that was certainly important to me early on when I only had funding for just myself. You want to get the target audience to use the processes and tools in the ways that you want them to do so. So selling is not just to people to approve program, it's selling people to do the things that knowledge management enables. And initially, you'll generally run into resistance on that. People will not normally immediately say, oh yes, I will do all of that. The typical responses that many of you have heard will be along the lines of, oh no, not another thing for me to do, not another place for me to visit, I don't have time to do it, et cetera. It's not an automatically accepted thing. So figuring out ways to deal with those kinds of concerns will be important. And then what are the organizations that provide support in your company? Those can be the leaders who answer questions. They can be the leaders of different teams. You may have help desks that provide support. You want to get into all of those channels and say, when you get requests for help, here are the kinds of things that knowledge management can do to help. So don't do it the traditional way you've been doing it. Augment it with knowledge management. And then when you have success in your program, and I hope that you all will have success, you have to market that success. And so knowledge management gives you lots of opportunities to capture the successes from the context of knowledge management. Unlike many other things, in knowledge management, you get sort of the evidence right from within. So as an example, if you have an enterprise social network and you have a user that asks for help in there and someone else answers their request for help, that's sort of your success story, and it wasn't any extra work. You didn't have to go and find it, create it, write it. You just sort of pull it right out of there. So capturing those successes, spreading those around, and having a way for that to be part of your story is going to be an important part for letting your leaders and your stakeholders and users know that it's going well. And yesterday we heard from one of the sessions where they talked about capturing the early stories from your users and letting that be part of how you then take it forward. And I think success stories plays a big role. So how can you get other people to help you, and what do you want them to do? Let's start with the leaders and champions. So these are the people who probably have the most direct involvement in the early going. And you want your people that are leading knowledge management, as I mentioned, to lead by example. If you have a leader of knowledge management who doesn't actually do knowledge management, that'll put you at a disadvantage. But we've probably seen that situation. So they should use the processes and tools themselves. They should probably be active in communities. And if not, you're going to have to figure out some way to try to either pull them in or sit by their side to hold their hand to do so. But you want to get to the point where the leaders not only talk about knowledge management, but they do knowledge management. Now, they mentioned the other functions, that long list of functions like IT and HR and finance. So they're going to be partners to you. You want them to view you as key partners, and you want them to support the program and endorse the relevant parts of it. So if there's training that you do as part of knowledge management, you want the training function on board to help deliver it, but you also want them to be also speaking of it and saying, we want people to take this training. Vendors can be really helpful to you. If you're using a vendor to supply you a tool that you're using, They can provide you with use cases and success stories from their larger set of customers that you can use to sell within your company. And they also can be helpful to you in terms of the terms and conditions and adding on functionality that you require, and if you need favorable terms in terms of what you're paying for the service. So you want to make sure that you court them and you view them as key allies as well. External consultants, especially in an early phase of a program, can play a key role. When I started my program at Digital, I was fully capable of going off and interviewing people myself, but I found that if I brought an outside consultant in, it got more attention than if I did it myself. So I called up somebody and said, I'm the new KM person. I'd like to spend a half hour talking with you about your needs. They might say, no, I don't have time. But if I said, here is the outside consultant from Coopers & Lybrand, who we had hired, they would say, oh, Coopers & Lybrand. And they would talk to them, right? So that may be sort of a superficial reason for doing so, but it's nonetheless a real one. So consultants can really help. They can also bring experience from having done it for other companies. They can bring experience from having done it themselves internally. And when you get them as a partner, that can certainly help you get the attention and also guide you in direction. So if you're brand new, external consultants and groups like APQC and others that help in implementing knowledge management, and many of the people here in this room who are KM consultants, I really endorse that you get a hold of them and let them help you get started. And analysts, people that are analyzing what's going on in the field, people like Tony Byrne and the Real Story Group and IDG and Gartner and Forrester and so forth, they're helpful because they'll generally have some kind of industry analysis about why it is that this should be done and where they are in the hype curve and where they are and all these kind of things. So bringing them in to help you make your case with sort of an official industry imprint is a good idea. And then your clients. We mentioned the clients already, but they should also be a part of this. What is it that they want from you? They should demand that the organization that they're doing business with uses its knowledge to their benefit. And so if you have clients that you can use to help with the idea that our clients are demanding this, they expect us to be able to reuse what we know. They want us to deliver faster. They want us to have more resources that we bring to bear. If we have expertise in a large company, we want to be able to bring that expertise and deliver it to the client at the time of need. And then finally, the KM thought leaders in the field, many of the people that have spoken here at KMWorld this week and those that write about it, you know, if you can become part of that, you've become one of those, then that also helps you because you start getting a reputation that says, hey, I'm actually respected outside of my company. Inside the company, you may not think I do anything worthwhile, but you know, let me just explain to you that in the field, actually, they think we're doing pretty well. And that can be a help. That was helpful to me because I used to think, and many of you may think the same thing, oh, well, I don't have anything that useful or interesting to say. It's all been done. We're just doing, you know, normal KM. And what you find out is that's not true. You're doing something that's unique. You're doing something that's important, and people will be interested in your story. And when you tell it, you'll find that others will appreciate it, and you'll start to at least feel better about the work that you're doing. Inside of your company, you may only ever hear complaints. And that was my experience. Oh, this KM program is terrible. And, I hate it. You're the worst. I mean, and it's not real reassuring when you're trying to get up every day and go into work. And then you go to a conference and you talk about it, and someone tells you, wow, that's really great what you're doing. And you think, oh, my. I guess it's worthwhile after all. So I really encourage you, if you haven't, and Jane called for people to submit their things for KMWorld, you should really do that. I know that I at first thought, oh, who cares what I'm doing, you know, because I thought I was not anything special. But then you find out that you are doing good work. People value hearing from you. Even if what you're doing isn't all that different, just the mere fact that you're willing to talk about it and tell your story is greatly appreciated. So I really encourage that part of selling as well. So articulating a vision, this is lots and lots of detail, but I don't really want to go through the detail. It's there. You have the slide. You can refer to it. And I encourage you to take from this those things that resonate with you. It's not going to be the same. We once had a session here at KMWorld a few years back where we said, what's your KM vision? So this was the one that I shared, and Bill Ives had his one, and Kent Green has had his one, and then we had the whole audience talk amongst themselves and share their vision. It got so noisy that the groom next door came in and complained that we were making too much noise. Well, that shows there was a lot of enthusiasm in the room, a lot of energy to talk about a vision. But I mentioned this before. I really think that if you can think about this and say, what is it that it should look like when it's working well? We may not be able to get there overnight. It may take us a long time. But what's the vision that I have? So for me, I used to always think about this. I think about this in this sort of futuristic terms. Well, if everyone in the company were doing this, Wouldn't that be great? And that's how you kind of have to think about it. So I'll give you sort of my top-of-the-head version of the vision. It's all in there in the detail, but mine usually centers around communities of practice. And people often ask me, well, there's 50 knowledge management components you talk about. That's a lot. What's the top one? And I say, well, if I only could do one of the 50, what I would implement would be communities. And they say, well, why would that be? And then I tell them the story. I said, well, imagine that if you have a community in your company for every important topic, everything that's important in your company, you have a community, exactly one community for that topic. So if you're a company that's selling some kind of a part, you have an engineering community, you might have a manufacturing community, you might have a sales community, but whatever it is, the things that you define that are important to your company, you say, what are those topics? And you don't make them too broad. You don't have one that's called technology. That's probably too broad. You don't make it too narrow. You don't have one that's focused on this widget and this module. That's too narrow. So you find the right granularity, and then you have one for every one of those topics. And now you say, we want everyone to belong to at least one of these communities, including the one that's the most relevant to your job. So if everybody does that, if everybody says, okay, I will join the community that's relevant to me. If I'm a mechanical engineer, I will join the community of mechanical engineers. Right? So now you have the community for every topic. Everybody joins at least the most relevant community, and maybe they've joined more than one, because they might be in an industry, and they might have a technical specialty, and they may have a role like project management. So they belong to 3 communities in that case, but at least the one that's relevant. And then you add a third provision, which is they pay attention to the community that they join. So Lee and I have experience talking about what we call join-only members. And we did some studies when we were at Deloitte together about that, where someone joins a community and then they never pay any further attention to it. They have no idea what's going on. They're a member, though. They joined. And so you don't want that. You want a community member who actually pays attention. He subscribes to the notifications for the community's discussions and attends their events and that kind of thing. But if they pay attention, now you can make this powerful promise about community, which is, if you have a question or you have a problem or you need to know something about this topic, which is an important topic for our company, and if you go to the community that's the relevant community for that topic, and if you ask that question, you will get an answer, and you will get an answer in a timely fashion. Now, if you can make that promise, that's a pretty powerful promise. You can't make that about too many things. If you said, if you need a document and you go to our document repository, I can promise you that it will be there. You can't promise that because it may not be there. Even if you have the best search engine, you can't make the promise that if you search for something that you will find it. But if you have this community structure that I mentioned with those conditions, you can make that promise. So that would be sort of the shorthand version of my vision. Now there's many other things in here, but what I encourage you to do is think about it in that simple shorthand version. Don't come up with one that's necessarily this long, but steal from this if you want. But pick the things that matter to you that you can think about. If this was true in my company, what difference would it make? And if you think about the power that could make, if you could talk to the average person and say, the last time you had a problem, the last time you needed to find a resource, what did you do? They'll usually have some story that they tell you about how, well, I went and I asked the person sitting in the next cubicle. And, well, what happened? Well, they didn't know the answer. And then what happened? Well, I sent an email out. And then what happened? Well, nothing happened. So if you have a better thing to offer for that, and your vision is going to get to that point, then that can really help you. So I really encourage you then to spend time on this one right here, and ask yourself, which of the various KM components matter, what matters most to our company, where do we have the most opportunity today, and where do we have the most challenges, and then let the vision address that. So if you looked at another example from here, everyone can easily find, follow, and be made aware of and share what's going on. If you could always find what you wanted, that'd be another part of your vision. Now, you're not going to get there easily, but it's a reasonable vision to have. Or if you said that we're going to have recognition and rewards for people that share their knowledge. Once again, like my case, it may take you years to get that. But if you start with that vision, I never let go of that. And I started with that vision in 1996. It wasn't until 2004, which is 8 years later, that we implemented the KM Stars program at HP. But I never let go of that vision. So even though you'll run into roadblocks, you'll run into people who will block you, never let go of it. Keep moving until you finally get it. And then appreciate it while you have it. the counterpart, the more practical version of the vision is defining compelling use cases. And you have to be able to put the use cases in terms that people relate to, that's relevant to their work, and it's something that they believe they want to do or they need to do. So here's two examples here. They're both based on acronyms that I coined. The first one, up in the lower right corner, is SAFARIs. That was the acronym that I coined at Deloitte when we were launching our Yammer network back 6 years ago. It's about 6 years ago this month. And the typical thing back then was to say vague things like, we're launching Yammer, everybody should sign up and start collaborating. And the problem with that is it doesn't really resonate with people. They don't, yeah, great. Instead, I thought about what do we really want them to do, and which things could I say that Yammer would do better than the other alternative? So I started thinking about this, rolling around in my head, and I came up with these 7 things. The first one was to share. So everybody in knowledge management is going to talk about sharing. It's sort of a fundamental part of knowledge management. But what's the best way to share? Many people think that they're sharing, but in reality what they're doing is they're sending an email to a distribution list, or they're doing they're sharing within a team, they post something into a team site, and it's only within a narrow, limited set of people. So if you want to share more broadly, like in the case of the community that I mentioned, an enterprise social network is an excellent way to share. It's a more effective way of sharing because you share not only with people that you know, you share with people that you don't know. And so when you explain that to people, I think they can relate to it. They can say, yeah, I guess it's probably better if I share in the network. In our case, by the time I left Deloitte, I think we had 140,000 members of the Yammer network. If I can reach 140,000 people, including most of those people I don't know personally, or I can reach 3 people through an email, which one may be of greater benefit to the company? Asking a question, I'd say, you can't possibly ask a question in a better way than asking it in this network, because you're going to reach people who are in the community that have the expertise. You may not know who they are, but they're going to answer you. And then you can demonstrate that. You can show them examples. As I mentioned, you can pull it right out of there and say, here are the last 5 questions that were asked, and look at the answers that they got, and look when they got them. Finding a resource. We're all always in the mode of we're trying to find an expert, trying to find somebody that can solve a problem, somebody that we can bring to see a client. And there's lots of mechanisms that knowledge management has in place for doing that. There are expertise location systems, skills profiles. There's many different ways to go about it, but the way that I find works the best is an enterprise social network. I don't have to have anybody fill in a profile. I don't have to rely on the system finding them. They can emerge by me asking for help. I'm looking for somebody that knows about Microsoft Windows 10. Someone who knows about Microsoft Windows 10 can respond. And I didn't know who they were in advance, but I knew they were a member of the Microsoft community. Answering a question, once again, it's the flip side of asking, but doing it within the network is probably the best way, because as I always say to people that write to me, I frequently get private messages sent to me through email or through LinkedIn messaging, and they'll ask me a question about knowledge management. Some of you here may have sent me such a question. And you'll know that I always answer that by saying, I'm glad to answer your question, but please post it in the SIKM leaders community. I will answer you there. And they probably get frustrated, and I just wanted the answer from you. I didn't want to bother anyone else. Just need a quick answer. But why do I always do that? Why do I always push them there? It's because not only will I give them the answer, but other people will give them other answers, and those answers together may be much more powerful than the answer I gave them. And in some cases, I don't even know the answer, so I would just be giving them a poor response. But also then the rest of the community benefits from it. So the same amount of effort to answer, you get all these additional benefits. So I push people there. I'd say half the time they do and go and ask in the community, half the time they don't. But that's one way that you can try to direct people, use the best way to answer and ask questions. To recognize is one that I really believe in very strongly. Recognition doesn't have to involve formal recognition programs like the one I mentioned, KM Stars, that we had at HP. It can be as simple as just praising someone in an enterprise social network. So in Yammer, there's a praise function. There's the ability to like a post. These are very simple things. You can write a simple note of thanks. So if I posted something in the network and somebody else used it, they could write a little response saying, thank you, that was helpful. That doesn't take very much time. But if you can get your whole company to do this routinely, and we actually implemented something called Thankful Thursdays, where on every Thursday of every week, we would say, think about somebody that helped you over the past week and post to the network with just thanking them, put their name in there, mention them. And if you can get the whole company doing that, now you reinforce that not only is it worth doing it, but someone's actually paying attention and benefiting from it. Informing about what you're doing and where you're going to be, which is what we call working out loud. Network really allows you to do that. And if you said, for example, I'm going to be in Washington this week at KMWorld, you may find somebody else that you didn't know will say, well, I'm also going to be there. And you go, oh, I didn't even know that you worked in knowledge management at our company. And that's happened to me before. I've met people that worked in my same company that I didn't know until I posted that I was going to KMWorld, and they said, I'm going to KMWorld as well. So to me, informing about where you're going to be allows you to meet up with people, informing about what you're working on, where you say, I'm working on a project to improve our rewards and recognition program. Someone else might respond and say, well, I'm working on one of those as well. Well, let's join forces. Let's combine. So working out loud can have tremendous benefits, but it's not our natural way of doing it. We tend not to let the world know what we're up to, but if you do, you can find tremendous benefit from that. And then suggesting ideas. In some cases, in companies I've worked at, they've wanted to have separate ideation systems, idea management systems, and I always recommend against that, because I said even if that idea management system is even better at idea management than something like Yammer is, it's another tool to use. It's separate from, and people will say, no, I'm not picking up yet another thing. So if your tool can do the thing that you need done in an acceptable way, and it's not yet another tool, then you should suggest using that, because now it's one fewer thing for people to learn. So those were the messages. Those were the 7 uses for Yammer, and that got kind of widely spread, and that image with the giraffe would appear on screens in local offices throughout Deloitte. So if you can come up with something like that for your case, and you may not use Safaris, you may invent your own, but I encourage you, think of something like that. Mull around in your mind, what are the things, mix and match so you come up with some kind of clever acronym which you can put a picture up with, and then just repeat that over and over and over again. And for me, the reason I use acronyms is not necessarily just to be clever, it's so I can remember the things. They allow me to remember. So when I first wrote my first book on knowledge management, I had these 5 things that you do in knowledge management, and I could never remember the 5. I always had to refer to them, and I realized if I put them into an acronym, I rearranged them, I could remember them. And that ended up being SIRCLE, S-I-R-C-L. I had them in a different order, starting with L. It wasn't an acronym. I couldn't remember it. So acronyms can be your friend. And there's this other acronym here, which is collaboration. So collaboration, you can look at the use cases there. I won't go through all of them, but you can pull from there and say, which of these mean something to our company? So you might want to really focus on learning. That may be an area you want to focus on. So come up with a use case about how just-in-time learning or experiential learning will be, something that's going to increase the effectiveness of your organization, and build that in. Or you may talk about how you onboard new hires and how knowledge management can help with that. So pick from this list, add to this list, modify this list, but ultimately when someone says, what do you want us to do in knowledge management, get real concrete. Say, next time you have a question to ask, we want you to ask it in Yammer. Don't say, we want you to network with your peers, because that's not specific enough. So use cases then become real important in selling. Telling stories is essential to selling, is essential to knowledge sharing, and we all tell stories, and we probably all told many stories this week by meeting up with each other. We start in and we tell our story. This is what I've been through, this is what I'm facing, this is some of my challenges. We all have stories. It's human nature for us to tell stories, and you should use stories regularly as part of selling knowledge management. So when you're starting out and they're saying, why should we do knowledge management? You need to tell a story. The story might be about a problem that you saw at your company that you think knowledge management can address. It could be a story about what some other company has done, a story you heard this week from one of your peers that you met at the conference. But when you tell the story, you're hoping that people will begin to relate to that story and place it in the context of their organization. So the idea is they hear the story, they think, yeah, we've got that situation. That's something we need to do. So storytelling becomes important throughout the different phases that we talked about when you sell. After the program starts, success stories become really important. You want to gather those stories, you want to tell them, you want to retell them, you want to celebrate them, you want to have the people who did them stand up and tell them. And it's really great when the stories come from the people that are doing knowledge management, not from you as the KM program leader. So when we ran the KM Stars program, one of the key aspects of it was we would ask the KM Stars, who were selected every month as the winners, to write a story that was 2 to 3 paragraphs long, very brief. Didn't take too long to put together, but the story was, how did I become a KM Star? And when they wrote that story, and that got disseminated, that was far more powerful than if I told the story. So I said, hey, let me tell you about a story that this person did. They shared their knowledge, and it was great. People will go, yeah, of course you're going to say that because you're the KM program leader. But when their peer, the actual consultant or the project manager that had told the story, told it in their words, that it had far more effectiveness than me telling it. So collecting those stories, as I mentioned, you can collect them right from the social networks and communities that you have, so that's a really great way to collect the stories. And as you mature, you get these stories from the voices of your actual users, and you want to collect those, make those available. And then when anyone asks you the question, well, what's the benefit of your knowledge management program? Because they're always going to question that. You can say, well, let me show you. In our case, we would collect all the success stories in Yammer and put them in a separate Yammer group that was called Yammer Wins. And all they had to do that was to find one of these little examples where somebody thanked somebody, and then I would share that into the group that called Yammer Wins. That would take about a half minute, and then I was done. And then someone would say, oh, I don't know if Yammer is really worth anything. And you could say, well, as it turns out, we have 350 stories in the Yammer Wins group. You want me to take you through some of them? These are actual stories from actual people. And it's got more credibility than if you just said, oh, we have this many users. That doesn't tell the same story than when you talk about a real example. And many of the implementation steps of knowledge management, you can talk about the different activities and components. So storytelling, really important part of selling your program. How many of you have heard of spin selling? Not too many. Spin selling's been around a long time, and I really recommend that you look at it. The book Spin Selling is still available by Neil Rackham. I got to meet Neil Rackham when the book had just come out, and what impressed me about his work is he was not a salesman, he was a psychologist. But he went along on sales calls and he studied what worked. So back then, and many of you are probably familiar with these master salesmen who write the book to tell you how to close any sale and how to overcome objections. And Neil's approach was the exact opposite. He said that actually trying to overcome objections or trying to close, these were negatively correlated with success of selling. And that in fact, asking questions was the key thing. So his research then documented what worked, and he developed this model called SPIN, and it's 4 kinds of questions. And these can be used very effectively to help you sell anything. In fact, they used to do spin selling training, and in the training, they would have people simulate a sale. They'd say something like, all right, pick something that you actually need to buy. Now practice spin selling on your partner in the class and practice these questions. So one of them was he was going to buy a car. So he used this to try to sell a car to his partner in the lab. And his questions were so effective that the person said, gee, I need a car, and they went out and bought a car. So they weren't even trying to do that. So what are the 4 kinds of questions? There's situation questions, where you tell about the facts of the existing situation. You're trying to elicit what's the current state, what's really going on here. Then there's problem questions. They try to reference the pain that people are experiencing in the current state. So you want people to recognize this for themselves. You don't want to tell them what their pain is. You want them to recognize it for themselves. So you ask questions like, is it hard to find information? And if they say, yeah, it's really hard to find information, you want them to feel that for themselves so that the pain level starts to rise in them. And then you ask the implication questions, which focus on the effects of the problem without dealing with the recommended solution. So you say, well, how much time do you spend searching and not finding? So you're getting into the real implications. Or what's the impact on profits when we start from scratch on a project? So now they begin to think in terms of, wow, this is really a problem, and it's going to have this impact on our company. And finally, then you finish with the need payoff question. So if we could do the following, what would the benefit be? Do you see value in being able to avoid redundant effort? What would that mean? How much could we save if we were only to reuse materials on different projects? So the need payoff question is where they really begin to put it into their own terms, and they go, wow, we can't afford not to do this. So if you practice spin selling through these cycles and you get the customer, the person you're trying to sell or convince, to understand the pain in their own terms, to see the implication of that pain, and then finally turn it into the impact. What does it mean if we could solve this problem? You have a much better chance of getting them to agree to what you want them to agree to than if you try to deal with it in more abstract terms, or if you just say, we really need this. And you have to have them internalize the need. So I recommend that you take a look at that methodology that to me is still quite effective. Making the business case. This is where you actually make a logical case for doing knowledge management. And in this case, you need to make it tied to the objectives for your company, but you establish plausible scenarios. For instance, you would say, if we could only save one terrible loss project, what would that mean to us? Or if we could prevent one product recall from happening, what would that mean to us? If we get 3 new customers, which we wouldn't have otherwise gotten because we didn't have reusable materials, what would that mean to us? And you try to make the business case that way. So it's sort of similar to the implication and need payoff questions from SPIN, but make the case in terms of the compelling questions. Do we want people to be able to really find the deliverables readily? Do we want people to be able to reuse materials from previous projects? And tailor that to your company. And then the last point I want to stress is avoid the ROI trap. Now, we've all been asked at one time or another, what's the ROI, or show me the ROI, or prove to me the ROI. And Richard Cross, who I quote extensively in the book, talks about the trap. He says, if you hear someone asking you, show me the ROI, that's really shorthand for, I don't really trust you, I don't really believe in you, I don't really want to do this, but I'll just have you go off and do an exercise. It's like, go get me the witch of the wicked west, the witch of the west. So don't fall into that trap. You can't really compute the ROI of a big KM program. You can compute the ROI of some very narrowly defined investment, but if you said we're going to have investment of a variety of things, you won't be able to prove the ROI of it. But what you can certainly do is make the business case. You can talk about the things that you're going to affect. You can tie those to the objectives of your company. And so I really think that you should do it that way. And then selling the benefits, which include understanding what the benefits will be for your company, articulating your vision, connecting those, making the use cases. These are all tied to selling the benefits and tying it to what's in it for the people. And then here are the 15 benefits of knowledge management that I've used over the years. They've covered an awful lot of cases, and I imagine you can recognize and identify with some of them. They don't all apply. You may find other benefits that aren't on this list, and I encourage you to do that. But pick the benefits that you think matter the most to your leaders and to people in your company, and then that's the ones you really want to hammer home. So if the important thing is that you don't want to repeat mistakes because you've had a long rash of making mistakes and repeating them, then zero in on that one. Or if you need to have much better standard methodologies, then focus on that one. But pick benefits that matter to you, and then expand on it, choose from this list, add to this list, modify this list, figure out the benefits that make sense for you. When you start getting the senior executive to commit to your program, you want to get them on board, and these are the commitments that I recommend that you consider asking for. Like a reasonable budget is a good place to start. If they won't give you a budget for knowledge management, then you've got to start right there. Trying to do it on no budget is a difficult challenge. And then you see the other things here. You want them to have time to do a good job. You want them to be able to help you by articulating the message for you. The more that your senior leader actually says things about knowledge management from their own firsthand personal knowledge, the more that they actually do it themselves, the much easier time you have of implementing it than if they don't. So it's possible to do knowledge management without this, but if you have a senior leader who is actually on board and can talk about it knowledgeably, incredibly, and they actually do some of it themselves, it's so much better. There are a lot of ways to motivate participation, and I'll list some of them here, but goals, performance ratings, promotion requirements, these are among the ways, but I really like the ways that involve recognition and reward. So you see the carrot and the stick there, but I really like the carrot more than the stick. So rewards, recognition, rankings, competition, gamification, lots of ways to do this. Now we have digital badging where you can put badges on people to show that they've accomplished certain things. And I've had success with that. There's disagreement on whether you should reward people or not. But in my own experience, that actually worked quite well because it signifies what you want the organization to do and that the leadership's behind it. So when they put their money where their mouth is on recognition and reward, it not only rewards people, but it also sends a message, this is important because we're funding it. I mentioned the importance of leading by example. So if you can, in the knowledge management program, be the best exemplars, that you actually practice exactly what you preach, that you actually know all about the tools and the processes and you're the best examples and you practice it and show it, then other people will have a tendency to follow your lead. But if you're not, then it's hard to get that done. And then finally, the pitfalls of knowledge management. I always like to throw this in because some of these you've encountered, some of these you may actively be using, but let me just quickly go through those. The first one is trying to rename knowledge management. I came up with a list of 50 different names that people have proposed for knowledge management. I don't think any of those have actually gotten any widespread adoption. So whether we like the name knowledge management or whether we don't like it, That's a name that exists. It's been around longer than some of the names that have come and gone as its replacement. So I recommend don't waste your time renaming it. Don't try to take on too much, meaning the field's broad. There are lots of things to do. Focus in on the things that are most important. Don't try to start out by rolling out tools. Start with what you actually want to accomplish for your objectives. And then I'll just mention a few that you see pictured there. Communicating with platitudes, buzzwords, and corporate speak. So have anyone ever heard the expression, our people are our greatest asset? Is that a useful and meaningful, when you hear that, do you say that's a great message, I'm excited? I don't think so. So look for things like that people say, and cut those out. Don't put those in communication. Get real specific, be real practical, speak in real words, avoid all corporate speak. If you've heard something many, many times before, then don't say that. Say something else. And the DIKW pyramid, if you've got that in your slides, I recommend taking that out. Don't think it has anything meaningful to convey, and if you get somebody like me in there watching, you're going to lose them. So don't talk about that. Talk about it once again in terms that are meaningful in your context, and sort of avoid some of these generic models and generic definitions. And then I mentioned ROI already, so don't try to compute the ROI of your program. Instead, make the business case. Talk about how it relates to the objectives that you've set. And I think if you do those things, you'll have success. So if you'd like to follow me and my writing, it's all available to you on LinkedIn. I try to write a LinkedIn article every week. There are some examples from some of my recent articles, and you're welcome to use that, and I encourage you to do so. And then for additional information, I encourage you all to join the SIKM Leaders community. It's a community for anyone interested in the field of knowledge management. We've been around for 12 years now. We have a monthly call. We have online discussion, and we meet in person. We had our dinner here this week with 50 people, and so I encourage you to join that, and the other references are there. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you the best of luck in selling knowledge management in your organization.